today we're talking about a programme called Going Upmarket with the Romans, and it was filmed in Standish in Gloucestershire, Series 12, Episode 7, and it was filmed back in August 2004. And I'm joined today by Dr. John Gator. John, hey, how you doing?
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I see you've got a nice cool beer there.
Well, I'm actually in the back room of the pub. That's why I put this screen on.
So I see that you've got the lovely geophysics from the episode there behind you.
Yeah, pretty impressive.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, it's always impressive, but I mean, this was a special one for me.
Why was it so special then?
Well, it's a bit tricky because it was down south from where I live. It was very close to where Phil lives, so it was on dicey ground. But being serious, it's in Gloucestershire. We've done a lot of surveys in Gloucestershire looking for Roman villas. And I think the hope was we were going to find a Roman villa here. When I say we think we were going to find, well, did we? That's the big question. We've mapped a complete landscape, a complete settlement with all the different components from the Iron Age through Romano British and up to medieval times when the site was heavily ploughed. You can see sort of zebra stripes going across the screen behind me, and that's the medieval ploughing known as ridge and furrow. So there you have in one plot 2,500 years of history. Yeah.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I do love this bit of geophysics, actually, because you can see there's the Iron Age archaeological features there. So you've got Iron Age ditches and potential roundhouses. And then moving on into time, you've got the Romano-British stuff. And then you've got this lovely, like you say, these lines going across the geophysics. Thankfully, it hasn't trashed the earlier archaeology, the ploughing, but then this medieval ridge and furrow going across the site as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that if you look at the stripes going across the screen, you can see that in some areas they're actually very dark. And that's because they're cutting into the archaeology below, not destroying it, but pulling some of the magnetically enhanced soils to the surface.
Mm.
And so when you see that in medieval ridge and furrow ploughing, it's usually because it's cutting into archaeological deposits. Now, there's some areas where the stripes don't show so strongly. And the reason is because they're not over archaeological features. And so they're not pulling the magnetically enhanced soils up. So when you look at the plots, often just looking at the ridge and furrow gives you an idea where concentrated settlement might be.
Oh, that's a fantastic tip. And it can be a bit difficult sometimes when it's really busy, can't it?
No, if you know what you're talking about. This was a classic, though, because we'd actually been to the site before Time Team went in. We went in a few years before. We did a small sample. So when we started the Time Team, we'd actually got the data from several years ago. And that gave us a head start because people weren't having to wait for us. So as far as I can remember, the trenches went in straight away and it gave us a bit of breathing space. But what was also nice is the work we'd done a few years previously, it matched exactly what we did during Time Team. So we could rely on that data and just mesh it in with the new results and the wider picture that Time Team gave us.
Let's talk a minute about actually how long that site was occupied for, because we've got Iron Age stuff, middle to late Iron Age archaeology, going all the way through to, I think the finds in the pottery suggest the 4th century AD.
Yes, you're talking there almost 1,000 years of history. And we're just seeing it as a plan of features in the ground. What were the enclosures? What were the rings? And it's moving from that sort of black and white line on a plan to understanding what it meant. And that it's not just a a feature cut into the ground. It was dug for a purpose, be it a defensive ditch, be it a ring ditch for a house, be it a pit for putting rubbish in or for storing materials in, whether it's a metalworking area or whether what we're seeing are just natural changes. So, yeah, 900 years, 1,000 years condensed into, one plot. And Time Team's job was to get a better understanding.
And I think at one point, Mick, and perhaps other members of the team are there's this element of trying to chase this Roman villa. There's a suggestion that there's a Roman villa there because there's been there's been tesserae and other pottery found in the area. And I think Mick's going, hang on a minute, we don't want to go villa chasing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, we've done a lot of work in Gloucestershire. We've investigated a lot of Roman villas, and Roman villas tend to give classic responses. As far as I was concerned, we weren't seeing those classic responses. But as usual, the first task was to convince all the different archaeologists that what we were dealing with on this plan was real. And I think what was so nice from my point of view, one by one, starting with Phil, believe it or not, then Matt, then even Kerry and Bridget saying, well, the geophysics is right. We can see those curving black lines in the ground. So despite me saying that, there was still a feeling, well, where is the villa? And I was still saying, well, I don't actually think we've got a villa. But that was part of the programme. Mm-hmm. Did we actually find one? This was never likely to be on that scale, but that doesn't mean it's less exciting. And I think this is where we needed to convince Tony that grand villas are grand villas. We can learn quite a lot from them, but we can learn a lot more from these sort of sites, which are a bit more compact and, to be honest, not quite so complicated.
So do you think it might have been like a grand farmhouse then, kind of built of timber, using, Roman pottery and whatnot?
It's difficult for me as a geophysicist to put an archaeological interpretation in that respect. But you're spot on. That's exactly what I'd say. You've got a series of roundhouses. You've got a series of enclosures, be they paddocks or whatever. And you've got everything that goes into what might almost be a small hamlet. That's what I feel we were dealing with.
Just because it's Roman or Romano-British doesn't mean there has to be a villa there, does there? I think it's when you see that everyday life and not this sort of grand Roman villa. Yeah,
the grand Roman villas were the big estates. Not everyone lived on the big estates. There were lots of people out in the hinterland. Some of the settlements beyond the estates, in their own time, became rich enough to establish small villas on the site. So instead of courtyard villas and so on, you might have a simple 3-roomed villa with a corridor. And that was the possibility here.
Really, the idea behind Time Team, I know, I've spoken to Tim about this, was a kind of mixed idea of doing this 3-day evaluation, effectively. It was never meant to be this huge open area excavation that you do for months and months. It was to try and kind of ascertain, sort of get some answers about a site, but not necessarily do the whole thing, because that being possible, often it was really about just trying to answer 1 or 2 very specific questions. And then that information can be written up in reports. Other archaeologists can pick up off that and do more research in the future. I think that was always the idea.
Yeah, what we needed to establish is, were we dealing with Iron Age roundhouses? It's possible they might have been much earlier Bronze Age burials, ring ditches that had later settlement on top of them. So we needed to establish the Romano-British or Iron Age, the roundhouses. We needed to get the dates for the enclosures. We needed to get dates for the main ditches that appeared to mark the limits of the settlement. And within the geophysics, there were a few areas where there were some very strong responses. Now, it was just possible that if there was a small villa building there and that had been destroyed by the medieval ploughing at the later date, it wouldn't show as clearly in the geophysics as normal. So we wanted to investigate some of those noisy areas just to make sure. And that's what we did.
So have you got any stories, behind the scenes stories that you can tell us from that excavation?
I think I got a bit carried away in that I was getting more and more excited because each trench I went to, the archaeologists were saying, well, the geophysics is right. I usually get a lot of hassle saying, where is this, John? You know, you're making it up. We can't find it. Here, they were finding the features. And it was so nice to hear everyone say at one stage during the programme, well, the geophysics is spot on. The geophysics is right. And to get Phil to admit that, he had to buy me a couple of pints in the pub. I mean, you'd never get it from Stewart because, you know, he never opens his wallet. Phil actually bought me a few drinks for this one, and it was much appreciated. Well, I say I got a bit taken away, and I'd have quite happily have dug in the trenches during the 3 days because the archaeology was just so clear.
It's nice to see that, isn't it, actually? And I know, you know, sometimes, you know, excavating in clay is not easy, but sometimes it can help it to be quite clear cut if you've got a feature cutting into the clay. So sometimes it can be quite nice to actually be able to see the features cut into clay.
And what was also nice about this program was that the way that Mick went about evaluating the site. Mick went back to what he really enjoys doing is putting in 1 metre squares. He normally does it in back gardens or within villages and so on. And we were dealing with such a big site, so many features. This seemed so appropriate to have a few small 1 metre squares targeted accurately over individual features to see what they were, and then to have 2 or 3 trenches which we extended more in order to get the bigger picture. And the strategy was just spot on. Yeah,
no, I think it was a really great way to do. And sometimes it's hard, isn't it? You've got 3 days, you're trying to investigate as many areas as possible. You're trying to answer the research questions that you've set yourself. And it's a question of how do you do that? How do you go about doing that? Where do you put your trenches? How many trenches can you feasibly do? And so there's some interesting decisions to be made there, aren't there, really, that can really affect the outcome of your understanding of the site within that time.
Yeah, and what's nice, they actually involved me in the decision making.
Well, don't they usually, John?
I won't say a word.
So I think I know what the answer to this next question is, but why should people watch this episode?
People who can predict what I'm going to say, it's because of the geophysics. Well, of course it's because of the geophysics, but I would say because of Victor's reconstructions.
Ah, there you go.
Some of the drawings he did on this site I thought were absolutely fantastic. And to take but one example, I'm pointing the wrong way, so I'll try again. This ring ditch just above my head, you wait to see what that turns into. And you wait to see how Victor treats that building. Would you believe it's a building? I mean, so skillful what he does.
Yeah, really is. Really brings the past to life, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. John, thank you for catching up with us. Really nice to talk to you, and for sharing your memories of us with that Standish excavation.
So I can go back into the pub now, can I?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Well, I'm looking forward to joining you for a pint on our future excavations.
Absolutely. I'm sure you owe me a few as well.
I don't know. I reckon you owe me a few.
Yeah, well, we know who owes most drinks.
Who's that?
Stewart.
Brilliant. All right then, John. Lovely to speak to you. Enjoy the rest of your pint, and we'll catch up soon.
I will do. Cheers.
Then. Bye.
I'm at the very start of a fugu, and it might be that there's more of these tunnels and caverns existing on this site. We're going to be here in September, so please join us then and back us on Patreon so we can do more and more work on these wonderful sites.